I am heavy
bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
This is Andrew Whitstadt, and you are listening to Heavy Bored. We're recording this podcast on November 2nd, 2024. My guest today is Sasha Saidman. Sasha is an author of 5 children's books who started writing in an unexpected way. And her uncommon story is laced with social media, TikTok, and the many ways it can help an author, even help an author more than paid publicists can. And Sasha has accumulated a large following, and not just fans of her books, but her family. The personal blended with the creative. Sasha was a high school dropout, struggling with dyslexia most of her life as she went on to obtain her GED. But that didn't stop her from writing, listeners. In fact, that didn't stop her from becoming a beloved children's author at all. She has been featured in prominent news segments, locally and nationally, for her writing, and she's been featured on many prominent podcasts and other talk shows. She writes a prominent blog at sashasaidman.com, where she chronicles her life and writing to a wide audience. And her latest book, titled First Day, An Adoption Story, came out just last month. And, of course, is linked in the description of this episode, listeners. Sasha, thank you so much for coming on Heavy Bored.
Thank you so much for having me on here today.
Sasha, I like to start this off with the same question we ask all writers that come on this podcast. And for you, it's going to be a little bit longer here because you have quite a story. We ask, what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did the early years start to form Sasha?
Yeah, so I'm adopted. So I was raised by my adoptive parents, and they were older when they adopted me. So they were very established in their careers. My dad is a lawyer, a patent attorney, and my mom was an English teacher for many, many years. But after my adoption, she became an adoption agent, which really came full circle. I was dyslexic, and I think something that I see parents as well as adoptive families struggling with is that I wasn't biologically there. So they really were handed a blind basket, and I suffered from anxiety as well as learning difficulties starting very, very young. And my mom started to notice that in the 2nd grade. And that's when I ended up getting my diagnosis, a very stereotypical dyslexia. I attended the Lab School of Washington, which really encouraged out-of-the-box thinking. It encouraged visual learning. They are specifically for learning disabilities, so I really was surrounded by people who all had that similar struggle with learning, and they found what worked. And I found theater, which I really clung on to with speaking and reading out loud in public. And then I started writing, and I would kind of categorize myself as a journal kid. And I would just journal big emotions, and that followed me into adulthood. And when I had children, those big emotions were love and excitement and joy, as well as some angst and exhaustion. And my first book I really wrote that was published was First Night. And I wrote it while rocking my daughter to sleep, and I was exhausted. But my mom had actually mentioned to me, who she had not been able to put her down, and she had said, well, she knows you. She knows your heartbeat. And I said, well, that's something that I connect with that my mom didn't when I was born. And so I wanted to write about that. And that also ties in my most recent book, First Day, where I really wanted to encompass my adoption. And that is such a broad situation, a broad circumstance. And that one has taken over a year of back and forths with multiple professionals. My mom had a lot of professionals and connections, and I have a lot of friends and family, and I really looked at every single person I knew who was adopted, and I tried to make sure that that adoption book would fall for them, and that would be something that they could connect with. So we were really careful about language, about parenting, about not mentioning specific situations or ages or ethnicities, genders, so that anyone who is adopted could feel connected to that book and could use that as a tool to talk about adoption, either with their child or even with their family. So I intend to use it to talk to my children about how I was adopted and my adoption story. And yeah, I guess that's kind of where I am today.
Yeah, that's fantastic. How old were you when you were adopted? Were you young? Were you a little bit older? Did you spend time in foster care? Like,
I was actually really lucky. So my parents were a little bit older, so that meant they couldn't go through an adoption agency. They were over 45, and they were
oh
told
wow.
they needed to reach out to family, friends, anyone. And my mom reached out to a cousin, and her cousin knew my birth mother and said, I have a friend who is pregnant with a baby girl and wants an open adoption. And they met at an Olive Garden. And I have an older sister who is biologically my half sister, and she was 16. And my mom says that she went back to the hotel with my dad and said, I want that baby. And she spent the last month of my birth mother's pregnancy with her. And I'm going to tear up, but she, in the delivery room, was with her. And when I guess, was born, my birth mother was offered me, and she said no, give her to her mother. So my mom was the first person to hold me, and I stayed in a long stay Marriott during the first month of my life with my adoptive parents until the adoption was finalized. And I have a really beautiful open adoption with them. And I actually, right before this podcast, received a text from my birth mother saying she had received the adoption book that she bought, and it made her tear up and that it was beautiful. And it's just, I'm so lucky to have that connection. And that's something that I really try advocating for, is allowing the adoptee to have as much control within reason and safety as possible. And my parents really did that for me, where they gave me the information that they had, but they also made me aware that I may want a connection and they may not, or they may not be ready. But they would support me however I wanted, in whatever relationship I wanted with them, as long as I was safe and taken care of. And so I really am lucky to have that today.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story, and I want to get into you with kind of like kind of themes of your work and stuff, the joy and family and stuff. But I was just curious about adoption because I don't know that much about it, and I think most people don't know much about it. And like when you said you had kind of an unorthodox, or I guess when we, at least I say that, but I don't even know, right, if it's unorthodox or not, because most of us get our information from like the cliches, right? Oh, a kid in foster care or something, and then these parents come in and like take you to a home, but. Yeah, that's very, very fascinating. That's fantastic. You lived in DC for a little while, and since I have the Maryland kind of DC Baltimore connection, I wanted to ask you about that. How long were you in DC for?
So I was in DC most of my life. I grew up in Wheaton, Maryland, and then my dad got a place in DC, actually specifically for DC funding for my school that I went to. And I lived there most of my childhood into my teen years, and he actually still has the apartment in DC, or the townhouse in DC, that I lived in when I was younger. And I love it. I love hopping on the Red Line and going to see places, taking my kids there to Steak and Egg Kitchen on Wisconsin Avenue. Just the little niceties of home.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. One of the things we like to ask writers that come on this podcast too is when did reading and writing come into your life? You said you struggled in school, but you had a great school program and stuff. When did you start to be like, I like reading, I like writing?
For me, I remember reading like Bob books in third grade. So Bob Has a Dog. That was my reading level. I was struggling with 3-letter words. Writing, I feel like I always enjoyed. My dad actually kept a letter I wrote him when I kissed the first boy, and I wrote him a note, and I didn't spell any of the words right. But I loved writing, and I loved art. And when I was, I'd say maybe in 7th or 8th grade, me and my mom discovered audiobooks, and we really got into them as a family, and we would go on road trips and we would watch them. And a recent movie that came out called Pretties, I had listened to all the books on tape, and I remember all of those stories, and we really enjoyed them as a family, and I still do. And we listened to them, and I found that YouTube has a bunch of children's books, so I'm kind of early introducing those to my son and to my daughter, and it's really fun. And I still have a hard time with reading page to page, but I really enjoy stories and books in general, and I think that I just discovered a way that I can do them that kind of keeps up with my brain. So audio has definitely helped.
Yeah, for sure. And It's interesting because I'm poetry is my background, and like I went to grad school and stuff for that, and there's a few poets that I know for a fact, and again more so 20th century because that's when we knew what dyslexia was and could diagnose it, that did overcome those types of things, and it's just fascinating. But also audiobooks, those are so big right now, where they think of like storytelling. It was an oral tradition, and that's something that they always talk about with poetry when you're studying it in college and stuff. It's like this stuff was oral until somebody wrote it down. Like the stories were passed down. That was somebody's job, like in a tribe or something. If we go way back, like you just, around a fire telling the story, and that was your job to kind of pass that along to the next generation. So I think audiobooks really are something that almost like we're getting back to our roots in terms of storytelling in some way, like kind of the oral tradition for that. And going off that with kind of writing and reading, what were some of the first writers you were enamored with, or who are your go-to inspirations or idols in the writing literary?
So for me, my first author that I really clung on to was Ellen Hopkins. And she wrote a little bit darker books for adolescents and teenagers, but she wrote from her experience with her daughter. And I think I really clung on to that when I started writing because it was very raw and it was really real, and I felt it on the page. I could feel that the writer had experience in these topics, and she wasn't just reading through a window. And so I really enjoyed those types of books. And so as a mom, I try and use those experiences to connect with other moms and then to connect with my children. And then I also take from people like, I want to say Shakespeare because I love Shakespeare, but I have nothing to do with him. But I loved reading scripts. So I loved reading Ionesco and Theater of the Absurd and how it didn't really make sense. And I think I've taken some of that whimsicalness into my books where there's some randomness, like A Boat in the Kitchen, where we have a big giant boat floating in the kitchen. And it doesn't make sense to have a cow sitting in your laundry basket. And it doesn't make sense to have an elephant breaking your sofa. But in Ionesco's Theater of the Absurd, he had all of these random things, like a train going through the living room and people meeting for the first time who had known each other forever. And I think I really enjoyed that funness as an adult even. And my children enjoy the visuals, so it really works out.
Yeah, it's interesting too, thinking about the kind of the theater of the absurd and kind of the imagination. I want to get to you about that, that with you about kind of the childhood kind of creativity and stuff. And it's like, fantasy is like still, the book sales are going down, but it's fantasy and stuff are still selling, like people like those kind of fantasy imaginations, things that, probably couldn't be real in the physical world, but like they're so important to imagination, to creativity. But I want to ask you about theater too, because you mentioned it with those, you're a theater kid where you said you found that in high school? Or?
Yeah. And going into ninth grade, I started going to theater camps and I was a thespian and I did a bunch of Shakespeare plays, Arthur Miller, Mark Twain. I mean, we had a lot of fun with it. And at the lab school, they really encouraged kind of what we went into. So I did 4 plays a year, including one that my teacher actually wrote. And me and him are still connected really a lot. And in, which one was it? I had in Melonade, the dedication at the very end of it, it says Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth. Because in the theater world, that's really faux pas, and it's very much like saying break a leg or good luck before anyone does something. And my theater teacher used to take us all into the stairwell and say, we all say it, and we all went Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth. So it was my little play for him, and that I wished the book good luck in our own unique lab school way. But yeah, I loved theater. I loved memorizing. I think my dyslexic brain still remembers the opening to Henry V, O for a Muse of Fire from 9th grade. And I'm not sure how, but that's how my brain decided to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I also kind of discovered theater in high school and stuff like that. And it was, what do you think it is about theater that kind of electrified you, like kind of got you really into it? Like, and this is not a podcast where we want, definitive answers. It's just your thoughts, like, what do you think attracted you to theater?
I think it was both an escape from who I was in high school, because high school can be so hard. But I think with every character, I also found little bits of myself that I connected with that I maybe didn't see before. So I was Hippolyta in, and Puck. And I think I found like a confidence in her. And I think I really loved that. And I did a little bit of singing, which I will not do again, but I really loved it. But it's never something I would have done. And it gave me a lot of confidence. And I think I really needed that as someone who is dyslexic and as someone who had anxiety. And I think just being a high schooler and being on stage and having that escape to go to after school, to dress up, to be out of my own kind of little bubble of, you do soccer and now you're a sports kid, or you wear black and you're an emo, or whatever it was. There was all these different kids and they were all, bubbling with creativity, and it was just really enjoyable and just a huge outlet for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk to writers all the time on this podcast, and one of the things that a lot of them say is having other outlets besides writing, like creative outlets, like expressing yourself through like dance or music, or theater. Kind of, it really does kind of, I think people underestimate how much fun it is when you just kind of let go and then, perform. It's borderline athletic, I think, a lot of that. If you're doing musical theater, you're dancing and singing while you're doing this. I mean, that's tough. I mean, yeah, I just think it's interesting what sparks creativity in writers and what's in any type of creative person. But yeah, that's great. Are you a millennial? You mentioned emo and all that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm a '92 baby,
Yeah.
so I was the emo kid. I still have the black nails on right now. It was Halloween, but yeah, I was definitely like my husband got me a retired emo kid sweater. I had the haircut. I had the black eyeliner with just smudges everywhere. I mean, I had full angst. And sometimes I wonder how I left the house, but I think it was all just that self-expression. I think when you find artsy kids, when you find people who are doing anything creative in their adulthood, you look back and you see some sort of angst and creativity and just that like really just raw teenage years kind of come out because we're trying to figure out who we are, and I still am.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because I'm a millennial, yeah, and I think millennials get a bad rap, particularly when people talk about it, it's always negative. But I'm like, millennials, like the emo stuff. Any particular like kind of favorite like emo bands and stuff that you would go to?
Oh my god! So I loved like Simple Plan. They were like Pierre
Oh
Bouvier.
yes.
I actually recently, I makes me sick to my stomach. I was on a train and I saw the drummer Chuck, and I thought it was him. I took a picture of him and I didn't say anything. And like a few days later, I saw a TikTok he made with the same shirt. I'm like, that was Chuck. I literally was 2 rows away from the drummer and I didn't say anything. And just my younger self was just screaming at me. But I mean, All That Remains, Escape the Fates, all not all time low, but basically,
Baltimore,
yeah,
yeah.
any band that was in old Hot Topic, like when you used to go
Yes,
in there and you
yes.
couldn't hear what they were saying was my stuff. Whenever I hear those like
Yes,
tonight will be the night, I'm like, yes, thank you. I just have
yes,
that
yes.
moment.
And it's a theme on this podcast because the hot topic moment,
Hmm.
the kind of that was very important to this in our entire generation.
Yes.
Like it was so important, Taking Back Sunday, and
Hmm.
even Good Charlotte,
Oh
right? The
yeah, Good
DC stuff,
Charlotte.
like
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
like
And I even still listen
so
to like Social Distortion, like kind of the older stuff. Like
yes,
I saw him live or them live, and Mike Ness, the singer, is just phenomenal, and he just embodies that like old school emo greaser look to me, and I just love it.
yeah, absolutely. And going off the millennial, are you a Harry Potter,
A
is
little
that
bit. I think I was discouraged with my reading, so I never read them, but I've watched all the movies.
right? When I was a kid, yeah, they came out before I could. I'm an '89 kid,
Hmm.
so yeah, kind of millennial still, but a little older. But it was like when I couldn't read books that size when they came out. So my
Hmm.
mom read me the first one or two, and then the audiobooks were that's why I brought it up because just like I was thinking audiobooks, the big ones. Who was that actor that did the American version? I know Stephen Fry did like the British version, but like the actor that did the American, I can't remember his name. Listeners will put it in the comments, I'm sure, but it's like he did all those voices. He basically embodied the voices and kind of I think that came before the movie, so
Hmm.
I'm sure that kind of affected the actors and stuff, like how they portrayed these characters
Oh yeah.
in the films. And but yeah, I like to talk about Harry Potter with that too because of the millennial it was so important to our generation in so many
Oh,
ways.
it was.
All right, and I wanted to ask you, You're the first children's author we've had on this podcast. So
Cool.
and I was excited for that. I wanted to ask, why children's books? When did that strike you, and how did you end up, uh, writing children's books?
So I've had an idea for a long time to write an adult book, and that felt very overwhelming. And I have snippets in my folders of different big events that happened in my life as a dyslexic, as an adoptee, and I've thought about writing this, and it just felt really overwhelming. But children's books felt more tactile to me, and I think there was the visual aspect where I really love the art, and that's something that I went through looking for so many artists, and I found Lola, and me and her just connected. And actually, my first book was not done by her, and I love it dearly, but everything since has been with Lola, my artist, and I love her. But the way that I write is so visual, where I'll type in my phone. Everything's done on notes in my phone. It's very old school. But while I'm writing, I'm thinking about the visuals, where when I send it to my artist, I've actually drawn out every single picture that I see in my head of what it looks like, and I've written down what goes with it, how many images go with each sentence, and then I send her a layout for her to go off of. And I think that that's where I really get excited, where I'm telling the story, but I'm just visually really telling it, because that's where I've really enjoyed images and books, is being able to look at them and find the little things. And she does a great job in that, where she adds in tiny details that children can pick up on, that are like learning words or things like a banana and an apple kind of in the background that kids will cling on to and see, and oh, I know that word, or whatever it is. And I really love that aspect of it. So I think when I started with A Boat in the Kitchen, it happened overnight. I mean, I was up at 10 p.m. and I saw a boat in the kitchen, and I said, I wonder what my son sees. And then I thought that would be a good book. And I have this piece of paper that I'll have to email you to show your audience. And it's written kind of in a diagonal, and I'm just seeing things and I'm writing them down. Like I see a cow and it's in my laundry basket, and I see this, and I have some notes over here, and I have all these different versions. And I went into my husband and I was like, look, I'm writing a book. And I was so excited. And that's kind of how it all started with that book after first day, where I wasn't sure if I was a one and done, but I hadn't really gotten on my roll yet. And that really got me kind of the big push that I needed.
Yeah, and you mentioned like, yeah, scripts and stuff in theater, and I wonder, like, you described it as almost like storyboarding,
Oh,
like when you're doing like kind of visual movies and like cartoons and stuff. Yeah,
oh, definitely.
which is, I mean, it's a writing process. Like, yeah, people are like, oh, it's just picture. No, I mean, that's a story process, like a writing process. Yeah. Marie Sendak, were you a big, any of the kind of like, the stuff that we read when we were kids, like the children's books, like Where the Wild Things Are,
Oh,
or
yeah,
like
definitely.
Give a Mouse a Cookie,
Yes,
like
A Give a
those
Mouse
kind
a
of,
Cookie
yeah.
was one of my favorites. And there was a book called As Quick as a Cricket. And I think that I try pulling from that, because as an adult now, there are books that I look at that the art is great, but it's nothing that like I really want to stare at for 10 different times, that my kids want to read something. So I really enjoy books that really go into the visuals a little bit more, where they might be a little busier, but they're just really nice to look at, and I can always find something different. So that's something that we do try and do, because I still love reading some of these books from my childhood, and I still find different things on new pages.
Yeah, yeah. And my next question was, how did that first book get going? You kind of answered that there, yeah. So that's fine. But I
Yeah.
wanted to touch on some of the
hmm
themes in your books too. So family, a theme in your work, and really many children's books, and kind of really all of literature, really. But I just wanted to ask you, like, what is it about family? This kind of, what makes it such a rich topic for you in your writing? And what makes it a good literary kind of dynamic? I know I'm a fan of the novelist Jonathan Franzen, and he uses family dynamics a lot. And those are adult, kind of very adult books, and he always claims that it's a technique in a lot of his literature. And maybe it is just a technique, but I think that could be kind of the cynical way of looking at it. But yeah, so just what is it about family? What makes it such a rich topic for you in your writing, and kind of a good device for literature and all of that?
For me, it's experience. So I find realism, like with reading Ellen Hopkins, that like she had the experience with mothering a child with severe drug and alcohol addiction, with mental health, and she wrote from that, and it felt very raw and real. And so I think as I'm going through my first few years of motherhood, I'm really pulling heavily on my experiences and my friends' experiences that I see because they're really similar. And I think it's really nice to see that and to have that in a really raw way, but also letting my children kind of lead in that. So, A Boat in the Kitchen, even though I wrote it and illustrated and did everything, they really kind of came up with it in a way where their enjoyment, their toys, their laughter, their imaginations really guided me. And I mean, I don't know if it's cheating or not, but I mean, I guess I should put them on that I give them credit in some way for those books. Um, but motherhood is also difficult. And so, one thing I haven't talked about yet is that I do have another book coming out very soon. We're kind of back to back, but it's called All Out of Ducks. And my inspiration was the book Go the Fuck to Sleep. And I love that book, and my friends love that book, and we gift each other it as a joke. But it has a bunch of F bombs, and I can't really read that to my 3-year-old because he knows what the F word
Right.
is. And I wanted to write a version of that for parents who are just all out of ducks. So you'll be seeing very soon this book, and we use animals as the words instead. And we also are trying to bring awareness to postpartum depression and maternal mental health, which is a really important goal of mine. And so I think that goes back to all of my books, which is cherishing the little things. So for family, it's in A Boat in the Kitchen, it's our children's imagination. For adoption, it's open communication in families. For first day, it's connecting with your baby on not just I'm the one who takes care of them, but to the heartbeat, to their, your smell, everything, to those little niceties. And to dust bunnies, it's teaching your children how to clean and enjoy it and finding fun ways to do really mundane, everyday things that all of us struggle with as parents. So I think each one I find a lot of joy, and I think I want to use my platform to both write children's books that families and children enjoy, but to also make sure that there is a message so that as it gets out there, it's bringing awareness to things that I've experienced, that my friends have experienced, that my children experience, and that maybe I can help someone. And I think that that's something I really look for is as a mom now, I want books that my children have imagination with. I want books that my kids can help me sweep and find dust bunnies because they're responsible for 90% of them. I want books that talk about maternal mental health and that bring that to light, that bring awareness in an age appropriate way for children, but also makes it so people don't feel as alone when struggling with something like that. And so I really wish that I had had all of these on my bookshelf when I first became a mom. And that's really been a motivator. But I really just find joy in my children. And it really is the cliche of when you would love it, it's not a job. But I'm really able to be a parent as present as I am because my job and the career that I'm making is really surrounded by them and their activities and their joy and what they love. And then a few hours a day, I do podcasts and interviews and writing.
Right.
And I love that too. And right now I'm sitting in my son's dinosaur blanket and I have about 5 different versions of dinosaur books in my head. And it's
Yeah.
easy. And I think it's really easy to write what you know. And I think that's what a lot of authors do is they write what they know or they write what they really want to know, like Harry Potter. We really wanted to know
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
wizarding worlds. So I think it's really fun to kind of find your niche and run with it. And that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'm fascinated by this too. I had my first child recently,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm much more interested in this kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
for good reason. And it was thinking to myself like, yeah, like family is one of those things. It's like maybe it's so prevalent one because it's just so human. Like everybody comes from some type of family, like even if it's broken or broken in air quotes, listeners, kind of it could be. I don't know, it's something you can't really buy, right? Like it's not like you can go to the store and get this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you can just imagine it. As you can't really fake it either, like there's no faking it. It's this kind of very, and I guess that's maybe what somebody like Franzen was getting at, where he said if you have a brother and sister in a story or something, it automatically sets up a dynamic, right? Like a relationship that you can move with and use and like kind of creatively and stuff like that. Or brothers, like my siblings and we were all very close, and it was yeah, I mean, I just think about it more and more now, like as a parent and all of that. So I was just, yeah, curious about your thoughts on it with how it all works.
Yeah, and I think, well, congratulations on your little one.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I think something that I also touch on a little bit, but in First Day, we have a line that's, when that one line turned into two, my heart skipped a beat. And for me, I had two back-to-back miscarriages trying to have my first child. And so when I wrote that, there was a little bit of a bittersweetness because I didn't want to write something that wasn't authentic, but I also didn't want to write something that started on a really sad note for myself and maybe for other readers. But I have a lot of like you mentioned, my social media has really started with pregnancy loss and sharing that story of pregnancy loss and getting my rainbow baby. And I connected with a lot of mothers and families and parents and even other siblings of, who are rainbows. And I think that book, I really struggled with the authenticity portion of it, that I really wanted to make sure I was honoring that story. But I didn't feel that type of book that was as much age appropriate as I wanted it to be. And I also think
Right.
that was
Yeah.
really like a wishful thinking. As a mom, I really wanted that moment. And the first time I saw Tess, that was the moment. And so I've, shared it with other people I know who have lost. I spoke to my husband's cousin who had a miscarriage, and then she had her rainbow baby boy, and I had my son the same way. And so we've bonded over those things. I have friends who have bonded over. I have friends who I met through TikTok who live close by, and our kids are a month apart. Her daughter's about to turn 3, and we're great friends, and we connected over those losses. And so I think connecting through that sadness really helped with deeper connection. But I think with writing, it's such a delicate topic that it's sometimes hard, especially when writing children's books. That's not really
Right.
how we introduce
Yeah.
it. But talking about it as adults and parents, I think, is also really important.
Yeah, that's something that you don't hear that often too, whereas miscarriages are very common. It's I don't know why. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll ask you why do you think that? I mean, it's something that people don't want to talk about. Maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe it's just painful, but it is so common. You don't have 2 or 3 kids without a few miscarriages
Mm-hmm.
in between. Like it's just kind of a very common thing. The body does what it does kind of when you're trying to get pregnant. And I don't know. I mean, you think it would be talked about more, with fertility and all of that, but it isn't really. I mean, and again, I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because it's just so personal, so painful. People don't want to. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, maybe it's the social aspect. I know the statistic is 1 in 4 women have at least one miscarriage, and 1 in 8 have 2. For me, I think there was a lot of thinking that I was at fault. And I think that that's a lot of that media doesn't talk about it. And so I really didn't know why I was miscarrying. And neither did my
right,
doctors. And that's how a lot of early miscarriages happen, is there is no reason. The
right,
sperm and the egg have a problem, and something doesn't grow right, and your body knows it. And that's really common. I mean, if you think about how many pregnancies amount in children with 10 perfect fingers and 10 toes and, all of those
right.
perfect things, it's pretty remarkable that so many children are just perfect little bundles. But I don't know. I wish that it was talked about more. And that's something that I do try and do with my social medias. And I know other women are trying to do it. And I think there is a stigma of announcing pregnancies in the second trimester versus in the first, because so much can happen. And I think that makes women feel very alone, because they feel like no one should know about it before it's real, before it's 12 to 14
Right.
weeks. And so if anything does happen, it wasn't really a pregnancy, or it wasn't really your baby. But really, the first time you see those lines as parents, your life has changed. Whether that amounts to a healthy pregnancy or not, your life
Right.
has changed fully. And my husband, I tell him that I feel like we were almost more prepared as parents, because when we went through those losses, it really solidified that we were ready for children. We wanted to go on this journey, and it was hard and it was painful, but seeing where we are now, I wouldn't change anything. I mean, I have 2 very healthy, beautiful children that just are the light of my life and are absolutely chaos because they're both toddlers, but it's really
Right.
fun and really chaotic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just that's so great. I mean, I this is almost like a weird segue after
Yeah.
talking about that, but yeah, I wanted to ask you about
Hmm.
imagination and kind of its role in writing, crafting stories. Your thoughts on imagination and your thoughts on do you think that children have kind of better imaginations than adults or are more able to tap into it? Do we lose something in adulthood that kind of hurts creativity or
Oh,
storytelling?
yeah. I think if you ask a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they say an astronaut, fireman, alien fighting cow. I mean, they have a million different answers. My son's going to be Spider-Man when he grows up right now. And,
Right.
by the time we're finished with high school, we're thinking about, well, how much money do I need to make? How much do I want to put into my 401k? How much, what type of lifestyle do I want to have? Do I want a, three-story townhouse? Do I want to live in a trailer? Do I want a mansion? And you start thinking about values outside of joy. And so as a child, their only value is joy, that I'm fed, that I'm sleeping, and I know where mom and dad are. And
Right.
we find more values and our values change and all of the needs of life change. So I think it's a balance of want and need, and children only can want, well fed, well housed and cared for children only ever want for things. They want more pancakes, they want more toys, they want more outside time, they want more juice, whatever it is. And as adults, we need to get the bills paid. We need to make sure our tires get rotated and our oil change gets done. And those things weigh really heavy, and we only have so much space to think about it and so many hours in the day. And I think with writing children's books involving imagination, we really want to nurture that as long as possible. And we can only hope that we nurture it enough that some of it follows them into adulthood so they follow more of their passions, because they really can do anything. And I mean, something with dyslexia is you're told you're dumb or you're stupid or you don't know how to read, so you never will. And I think that that's so false and dumb of people to say, honestly. But in some way, I know my son will never be Spider-Man. But at the same time,
Right.
if he wants to do theater or if he wants to go into acting and he wants to play that role one day, then awesome. You see these actors who are like, oh, I watched this show when I was younger, or I read this book and now I'm playing the character. Those people held on to that imagination. And it's really beautiful to see that. And they're really enjoying life. And so I think there's imagination with that, but it's also just nurturing just love and creativity and not letting them go of that. So if my child wants to put stickers all over his brand new bed frame, letting him do it. If he wants to paint his room yellow with a giant blue dinosaur, then let's do it. Let's have fun with it. Let's enjoy it. And hopefully allowing him to have that freedom of creativity will follow him, where if everyone else is writing a book about, you know, this and that scientist, and he says, well, I want to write a book about, this theater guy or this actor or this writer, then he feels free to do so because we've nurtured him to have that free thought and to maybe walk off the beaten path a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking now when you say all that too, like I wonder how much of imagination is associated with kind of drive or will, especially to do something difficult, like yeah, like try to act or something. You mean for a living or be a writer,
Hmm.
right, for a living or something. Yeah, like kind of how much imagination is important to that. Like, and I think yeah, maybe people would say that having imagination or prioritizing imagination, yeah, that's something for children or that's a luxury, right? Like that's a luxury because yeah, we have to pay bills, we have to go to work, we have to do all these other things as you get older, and oh, it's a luxury to be able to do that. But then it's like, well, I mean, people almost say like, the success comes from almost delusional beliefs, and I wonder if that's like a delusional belief that you could do it, and it's like I wonder that strikes me. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure some psychologist out there could tell us, but it's just like I don't know. But it seems like that kind of coincides with the imaginative impulse. Like you kind of have that impulse, like, and I think people are, most of us live fantasy lives in our heads more times than we, especially kind of with technology. Everyone's talking about that social media, online world versus the real world, kind of all of that. Like a lot of us do, imagine yourself in a movie when you're walking down the street or something. Like that's like an entertainment activity that even adults do, and they don't like to admit
Mhm.
it, obviously, because it's like, oh, you're foolish, but it is. That's imagination.
Oh,
That's creating. Yeah.
definitely. And I think that everyone does it, like you said, and doesn't like to admit it. I mean, I've had plenty of times where I've thought about, like, what would I do in this scenario? What would happen? What
Right.
type of
Yeah.
events would fall if I did this? And you always want to imagine yourself the heroine of that, that you're
Right.
the one who
Yeah.
saves the day. And I think that, yeah, I think it definitely could be connected to, I think, entrepreneurship. I think when I see entrepreneurs online, especially like these people who said they've spent 10 years making this, that, and the other, they imagined that success, they worked for it, and they probably had 101 people telling them that that's not going to work, that they should get a day job. And maybe they had one, but they still were like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this for myself, and I'm going to figure out a way. And I think that that's something that is getting more and more lost, but I think needs to be nurtured more and more, because that's really where the world is going, is, people working for themselves and doing what they love. And, when you do what you love, you don't work a day in your life. I don't feel like I'm,
Right.
working. I've worked at coffee shops, motorcycle dealers. I've helped teach. I've, done all sorts of odd and end jobs. And this by far is the easiest, but it's also the most rewarding. But in some ways, it's also the hardest.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
it's such an enjoyment that I really forget about it some days that I'm working, and I love it. And I don't have to clock
Yeah.
out, and I don't get to clock out.
Right. Yeah. Why do you think it's fading? And again, we don't need definitive
Mhm.
answers, just kind of your thoughts, like kind of that impulse, or because I would say like you're an entrepreneur,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like you're building this kind of thing around yourself and your work. I like to think of myself generously as like I'm trying to do something around myself and this podcast and my writing and blah blah blah, all of that. Like, and yeah, it takes a lot of work, it's a lot of time, but it's also kind of, I don't know. I mean, yeah. Well, why do you think it's fading? Is it just disconnect? Is it
Maybe
like
it's from my
we have too much going
Yeah,
on?
maybe it's from my own experience, but when I was growing up, there was always, you had to go to high school and then you had to go to college and you had to have a career, and it was very set in stone. And I feel like that's a big push. And so even my parents tell my 1 and 3-year-old, oh, well, we're going to get college, get their college stuff together. We're going to start college funds. We're going to
Right.
do this. And I, went to classes, but I never got a degree in college. Um, and I think that that is just the most straightforward route that some of the older generations see. And maybe that will change with our generation, with our children, which I hope. But, I see as trade schools and internships and things like that, living in group houses again. Maybe my son will live in a house with 10 different other kids trying to make ends meet, but
Uh,
they'll enjoy themselves and figure out their own direction a lot better than going to a 4-year college and then moving back home because they didn't find a career they liked in it. So I think just accepting that it's okay not to know exactly who you are at the age of 18, I think is
right.
okay. And I think that that's not something that I was told. I was told that at 18, you need to figure out what school you're going to and the career choice. So you needed to figure out a minor and a major, figure out what you're good at and then do it. And then you're going to get a job and you're going to build your way up from there, and you're going to have all of those things kind of laid out. And that felt really overwhelming. And so I think my hope is that in this next generation, and I do see it in ours as well, that we're kind of out of the box and doing our own thing, like you with the podcast, me with writing. My husband does eBay sales, he loves it, and motorcycle stuff. But yeah, I think seeing that and really nurturing that in our own children, because that's something that maybe we didn't have as much of in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah. It's interesting. Very interesting stuff. Another theme in your podcast, joy. I mean, another theme in your books, joy. Uh, why is joy so important in life, or why would you say, and is it missing in the world today? Do we have less of it, or is that just something like growing up, like becoming adults, the kind of inevitable kind of thing? Yeah, but joy. What do you mean by that, and why is it so important?
So the way I like to describe it is like when you're scrolling through your news feed and you see politics and you see controversy and you see people creating drama online for the sake of the drama, for the sake of the clout. And then you see like a monkey and a cat as best friends at a zoo. And that's
Right.
just so, it just puts a smile on your face and you're like, that just made my day. That was great. And that's really what that joy is finding it and just hanging on to it and trying to put more of it into the world, because there is so much. And with social media, it's such a great tool, but it also makes it so all of this darkness and all of these really negative things happening around the world are so much more reachable from your bedroom. And, you can
Right.
open your phone and you can see something that's happening on the other side of the world, where 20 or 30 years ago, unless you opened a newspaper to find that section, you maybe wouldn't have even known that happened. And now it's really
Yeah.
in your face and it's scary, and the world is a scary place, and letting your kids play outside is scary. And so I think trying to put more joy and more light and more laughter and just try pinning on those joyful moments, like imagination, like finding a toy in the kitchen, and even trying to turn things that are difficult, like cleaning and being overwhelmed as a parent, into joyful things. It's the same thing as saying, is the glass half full or half empty? No matter what, it has the same amount of water, but you can choose how to look at it. So looking at it from that perspective of, I'm going to start my day and I'm going to look at it as half full. And by the end of the day, it might be half empty, but we're still in the same place we were, and we're going to still do it again tomorrow.
Yeah, it's kind of like an attitude, approach, and then also a choice, right? Like you said, that we're kind of bombarded with
Hmm.
things. You scroll a timeline, and you can see anything you want in the world, kind of. And it's a choice to, what are you going to focus on today? Are you going to focus on, a war that's happening, across the other side of the planet that like you really can't do anything about unless you're like some type of government
Hmm.
official, elected into some office or something,
Hmm.
actually have some power or run a nonprofit. So there's only a few people that could do something about it. But then like, yeah, you could get worked up about that. It could zap the joy out of you. Or do you want to focus on this stuff that actually gives you pleasure, actually, yeah, makes you laugh, gives you that feeling of kind of warmth, right? I guess that's the best way to describe
Hmm.
it. Yeah, that's very real right now. Uh, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Would you say it was easier to focus on joyful things pre-social media, or social media is another theme on this podcast?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
think it might have been easier, but I think we were more shielded from it. So by having social media, I mean, you can Google one thing, one word, and you can find a million
right,
different things. I mean, I'm scared to send my children to school, and that's not a fear that my parents really had for me, even though these
right,
things were still happening in the 90s and early 2000s. They weren't as on your they weren't on your news feed as much. Um, and that's scary. And it's scary to see even things that haven't happened, but things that were stopped, I think is a really scary idea. Like saying that something was stopped at this local elementary school, or there was assumed things, but everything's fine now. Just that idea that something could have happened is now kind of implanted in your brain that it could happen. And then you start getting scared. And I'm sure, like most parents, like me, I spiral. I start thinking about,
right,
what would I do? And that's where imagination cannot be a good thing, where I start thinking about all of the
right.
possible scenarios of what if I couldn't get there in time? What if something happened, and those are just terrifying to even think about. But yeah, social media, it is an amazing tool, but it lets all information reach, not just some. And so it's good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right. Yeah. 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 Do you? How do you balance that? Do you? Excuse me. Do you have like a balance that like a way that you, I guess the easy thing is to block or mute or unfollow something that's always constantly posting something that doesn't spark joy, right? To use the phrase of Marie Kondo or whatever. But it just, yeah, like how do you balance that? Especially somebody, you've used that tool, and I think you're right about this. It is kind of like a tool to use, and you've used it to great
Hmm.
success, like to help your entrepreneurship, your creativity and stuff, your business. And it's, I mean, I know it's cynical to call it a business. It's more than that, but still, like, yeah, how do you balance that? Or
Uh,
how would you say you do, or try to,
so
I know it's hard.
I,
Yeah.
so on my social media, I initially posted a lot about my children. And there's definitely a lot out there that tells me that that's not a good thing, and that there can be a lot of dangers to that I'm very aware of. And I'm really careful now. And I tend to post a little bit less because of that. Um, but the negative messages or the negative comments that I would receive, my son was very big, and he still is. he was just a chunky dude, and he was breastfed, and he has big bones, and he comes from a really big family on my husband's side. But I would get a lot of hate comments about his weight, and I just blocked him.
Right.
It wasn't worth my time, and I probably have hundreds of people blocked because of it. And even if they
Yeah.
meant well, it wasn't in a nice way. And if someone did say it in a nice way, I would nicely respond. But I would really try to let it roll off my back, and I would just try blocking the comments as much as I could. And I think that that's
Right.
all you really can do. And there's always going to be haters, as my husband says.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think you have to find your own truths, and I think that's for everyone. So I always found security with knowing my children's pediatrician and my educators and our own family and what they were saying, and that was our truth. And so anything anyone said about my son having issues or he'll have diabetes later in life, if I had a genuine concern, I would bring it to my doctor and to his doctor, and she would give me peace of mind. And that's all I needed. And I think I needed to let go of the thought that I owed it to anyone to give them answers, because I was his
Right.
parent. My husband was his parent, and we were able to make sure that he was safe and that he was healthy and that he got all of the medical care he needed. And I think I see a lot of creators doing that now to protect themselves. They'll delay putting videos out, going through IVF journeys, going through pregnancy loss. They'll delay posts for weeks, if not months, just to make sure that they're protecting themselves from all of that negative messaging, or even just messaging that they don't feel like they want, of,
Right.
unsolicited advice, which is never
Exactly. Yeah.
ending.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's weird too, because like it creates this dynamic where when you are putting that stuff out there, people feel like they're allowed to, like you would never say that to somebody if you were just talking in a park or if you were at a social event or something, your kid's school or pre-K or whatever. They would never
Hmm.
dare mention anything about that, but then all of a sudden they feel like they can. And it is this kind of, maybe that's one of the tools that people should use more, right? Is the blocking or the muting or
Hmm.
the kind of like, you're allowed to say it, sure, but like I don't have to see it, like I don't have to hear it,
Hmm.
I don't have to fucking stay here and listen to it, because if somebody was doing that in person, you would walk away or you would turn your back or something. But yeah, it is strange, it is. And again, that I'm sure it's, well, I mean, again, you've reached that point where you have so much, a lot of people following you and doing your work and stuff, and that, I guess it's probably the minority, right? A minority of people that do that stuff and comment that way or whatever, feel that they can. But it's still like kind of, oh man, like that's, who do you think you
Yeah,
are
I've dealt with
going off
social
that?
media
Yeah.
trolls quite a few times. There's been profiles made under false names that were people I thought I knew. And, you can also just report them. You can shut them down. And I think that's something that you can do. And if you have a large amount of followers, much larger than me, you can also go to your followers and say, hey, these people are harassing. It's a fake profile. Please, report them, because they need to be shut down. And, the power of the internet, they'll get them shut down within hours.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder too, like you talking about like joy, it's a choice, right? It's a choice to engage with that. It's a choice to view it, but also like the people doing it, like it almost always comes from a place of malice. I feel like it almost always comes from this, like they're trying to take some of your joy, or they're upset that you're sharing this joy, or that
Mm.
something like that. Like it is kind of crazy that like, well, because they can't find it on their own, or they don't understand how to find it on their own, or let's be charitable. But it's still like, yeah, like it does always kind of feel like, oh, you want some of this, or they want some of your business, right? They want some of your following, they want some, like it feels like they're trying to almost come in and snatch, something.
There's something that I always kind of bring to mind, and it's like a DBT term, dialectical behavioral therapy, called changing the mind, where you can really choose how to think about a situation or a person. And
Right.
so, you can look at someone who has hate comments and is trolling you and sending even, death threats about your child. Um, and you can either look at them as something really hateful and really heinous, and you can get really, really mad at them. Or you can say, this person has nothing better to do than troll a 1 year old
Right.
on TikTok. I mean,
Right.
how sad is their life? And you can really try changing that anger that you'll initially feel to just sadness, that you're just, I'm really sorry for that person, and I'm going to block them because I don't want to see it anymore. but I really hope that their life has more fulfillment on another day, because that's a really sad way to live, just to troll and try and make other people miserable. That must be a really miserable person. And I think that that's something that we can take into parenthood and to adulthood and talking with our friends, is when someone is being really mean to them, or someone's being hurtful, or really trying to get under their skin, trying to change that anger, that initial emotion, into just empathy and just, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry that you feel just so miserable in your own life. You're trying to rub it off, and I'm going to, let it roll off my back. I'm going to go on my day. I'm going to enjoy my children. I'm going to go outside and play soccer. And you're probably going to sit on your keyboard and you're going to try making other people's day miserable. And that's really sad, but I'm not going to let it ruin my day. And I'm not going to bubble over with anger, because I'm not angry. I feel really bad. And so I think that that's powerful. And that's something that I do for myself to keep myself safe. And that's something I'm trying to instill in my children, that, they have already come across people that, either don't like
Right.
them or don't want to, and it's okay. And, life goes on, and we can change the way we think about it. And that's our power, is we have that power. We don't have the power to change them, or to change their mind sometimes, or to change what they're doing, but we have power to change our own emotions and how we think and how we talk about them.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, I mean, yeah, and I think people don't think about that too. Like, everybody wants to have a large social media
Mm-hmm.
following or something, but then when you actually, wanting something and getting it is two different
Mm-hmm.
things. Yeah, like what you have to deal with. And going off of kind of like the joy and stuff, like you've said you want your books to uplift and fill readers with hope. What do you mean by that in terms of like uplifting and filling with hope?
Yeah, so specifically with Melanade and my adoption book, is I really want to promote that advocacy of talking and speaking out about things. So with Melanade, we talk a lot about dyslexia, and I had a lot of struggles with that. And so I really want that movement of say dyslexia, of that it's not a bad word, just like with miscarriages, just like with adoption. I want it to be more broad of a statement, and I want more people to know about that joy. And so I think even just giving it a little bit more of a platform is a benefit. So even just talking about it, saying the words, putting them into the universe in a positive light, I think can help with that. And I, at one point, went on Fox 5, and I had a gentleman who was interviewing me, and he actually came out as dyslexic on live TV. And he's a news anchor. He does it for a living.
Right.
And it was phenomenal, and it was beautiful. And that was such a powerful moment for TV, for a news anchor to come out, because all he does all day is read. He reads off of news
Yeah.
anchors. He reads scripts. He's talking on live TV. I mean, there's, no second chances with that. And so that was a really powerful movement. And being on the show, in a way, I hope that my book Melanade helped him do that. And so hopefully that reached a lot of people. And so that's all I can do. But that was a really beautiful moment for me to be sitting in my house writing this little book called Melanade, to the point where a Fox 5 news anchor was declaring he was dyslexic on live TV. I mean, that's a pretty powerful moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something too with like with children's stories, especially like I'm thinking of like the classic Disney stuff that we all grew up watching, and all. There always ends with this kind of hopeful, like if there's not a happy
Mm-hmm.
ending, like it doesn't quite leave you with that kind of uplifting feeling, like it really does. It gives you something when you're reading a story, or you're watching a story, or listening to a story, and it turns into this, even if there's tragedy or drama happening within it. When you get to that ending, the kind of story they call it, the storybook ending, right? Well, the storybook ending is important because maybe, I don't know, I mean, I'm thinking really kind of psychologically here, but just kind of maybe that gives us the strength to keep going and stuff. When you see a story like that, you see a happy ending, you see somebody overcoming a tragedy, like it does give you the strength to keep pushing through those people that are trolling you, or pushing through something that's bothering you, or struggle you're having. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's so important. Like, I mean, obviously there are dramas, there are sad endings, there are tear jerking stories, but like the most popular stories, the stories that endure, do have that kind of happy ending. And I think you see it particularly in children's books and children's literature, like, because it does kind of teach you that lesson. Uh, yeah, I mean, I was just thinking of it now with you saying that. It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
so something we did with Dust
Please.
Bunnies when I was writing it, I really wanted to write something that would allow children to have a visual with cleaning, But I also really wanted to get across to parents that dust bunnies aren't bad, just a little unclean. And so the ending of that book ends that there are dust bunnies in your house, but it means that you've had this wonderful day with your children. And so I
Right.
think that there was like a twist there where, you're some days not going to have it all. And with children, most days you might not have a clean house, but you might have a really fulfilling day with your kids. And so finding your own happiness and finding that little blip where, okay, the floors might be dirty, there might be dishes in the sink, but you had this great day with your kids, and to really like look at that half full moment. And so I think that book really embodied that really well. And my most recent book that's coming out soon, All Out of Ducks, we really try to key on just the little joys, the little niceties, the quirkiness that happens every single day with toddlers. Um, I've had so many of my friends write in and give me ideas and outfits and ideas. It's just so much fun to write things like that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, going on to the writing with this, like the last couple of questions we all have are all have to do with craft, and we like to ask these of all writers. But for you specifically, I wanted to ask: did you self-publish your first few books,
Yeah.
and then when did Blue Balloon come into it, and all of that? Yeah,
Yeah. So Blue Balloon is kind of a hybrid publisher. So I
right,
kind of did everything. We honestly I paid too much money to kind of get their name on it. It wasn't a real publisher, and it was a rookie mistake. And my pockets definitely felt that one, and so did my wallet. So after Blue Balloon, I decided with my dad that me and him were going to figure it out and kind of create a team. And we were able to go on Upworks and Fiverr, and I was able to find an artist freelance. And because my dad is a lawyer, he was able to write up contracts that made sure that I was protected. And Fiverr and Upworks has their own level of protection as well for whoever's kind of
right,
getting the work. We were able to find a gentleman who helps us with uploading, which is kind of busy work, which I'm sure I could do, but it's really, really helpful to have someone
right.
who helps with things like that. Um, and I am currently looking into getting an agent. So I have a woman who's phenomenal, who's been helping me kind of write those letters and edit those things for me to get organized. But we really have like a little bit of a team, and we're all on text and email. It's very natural and kind of old school. And we text each other. I was just texting a gentleman earlier today about it, and he's getting started on uploading All Out of Ducks. And, I email him over everything, duck one, duck two, with all the pictures.
Right.
Um, but I think that self-publishing kind of gave me a power, and I feel like my goal isn't to be rich or to,
Right.
make millions of dollars. That's not a realistic goal, and it's not really my goal. My goal is to really get my books out there. And so this was the fastest
Right.
and the most economical way to do it, where I have the most joy. And my main goal is to be home with my children during these very few years that they are home and that they do want to spend time with me. So, and that's really
Yeah.
how I met that goal. And I was able to find something that really worked well with that goal. And so I think I'm going to be at like 6 books this year, total once the year is up. And I mean, that's a pretty good first year, I'd say.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I was looking up. And this is another kind of theme on the podcast where we're kind of constantly talking about self publishing versus traditional publishing versus all this stuff because the economics are changing so much. Like it's changed, like every day it's shifting beneath our feet. The old model is it still works, sure, it works fine, but it doesn't quite, there's all these tools now where you can. I interviewed a poet, this guy, he literally makes a living. Yeah, he's not a millionaire or anything, but he makes a living self-publishing his poetry books through Amazon, having a podcast and stuff, kind of email lists and stuff, kind of cultivating his own kind of business
Mhm.
around himself and his work. And he's doing that completely without an agent, without a publisher, without, marketing budgets, without like all this stuff. And I'm just like, nobody's talking, or at least they're not talking about it
Mhm.
enough, I
Yeah.
feel like. So I like to talk about it on this podcast. So when I looked it up and I saw like, yeah, almost all your books came out. You've only been doing this like a year. Obviously, it took you longer to write some of these stuff, but putting them all
Hmm.
out like within a
Yeah.
year, like that's
Yeah.
fantastic.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, Boat and I actually just celebrated 1 year since I was sketching out A Boat in the Kitchen. So it's taken a little over a year and a half to get all of them kind of done and out. And I probably have 10 more in the works that I'm just slowly kind of getting out. I have other ones in sketches. I have one that's really important to me. I want to write a book about divorce for children. which has been very difficult because it's a very heavy topic. And so heavy topics,
Yeah.
there's definitely, I want to do it justice. So this one, it's taken a lot of time and it's had a lot of um, transitions and it's changed a lot. But I think that that might be something that comes out next year from me. Um, because I'm a child of divorce, and I think talking about it and having age appropriate, honest communication is really important. And that's something that I really have in all of my books. But again, writing from experience. So I'm trying to write from my child experience, and also talking to friends who have experienced it as parents and what they would talk about and what they had a hard time talking about. But yeah, it's a challenge, but I really love self-publishing. I really love doing it myself,
Yeah.
and I love that I own everything. My dad is a
Yes.
copyright attorney, so I have the copyright on all of my books, all of the art, on my brand, and I think that's a real power. And I think in this type of economy, in this type of world, having your own of something where you're not, balancing that with a corporate table of, 70-year-old people is is really something
Yeah.
amazing. And it's something I value, and it's hopefully something I can instill in my children, that if they want to do something, they can do it, but they also need to protect themselves because, you need to kind of have that level of protection. And so I'm really lucky to have my dad at the beginning of this journey and making sure that I'm set up and that I know the right procedures and the right contracts and how to read over things really carefully. And it's definitely good. Even with Blue Balloon, he wrote over everything and made sure that I wasn't getting the short end of the stick on anything, even involving them, where we were still, MacGyvered. But I think everyone
Yeah.
starting out at least goes through a few little dips like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm fascinated. We're listeners are fascinated by this too, in terms of like the kind of self-publishing journey, and yeah, taking that control. Whereas you're not waiting for somebody to say yes. You're not waiting 3 years for somebody to say yes or no. On a project, you're just taking control and putting it out there and letting the audience decide. Like if they want it or not. I remember this was years ago. My wife and I were at this kind of like, party for her work. And one of the guys she worked with, his wife, I was talking to her and I was like, oh, what do you do? And she's like, oh, I write children's books. And this was 2017 ish, kind of time. And I was like, what do you mean you write children's books? And she's like, oh yeah, I just self-publish them on Amazon, and she would make the art herself and stuff with, kind of through the varied, there's plenty of softwares. If you have kind of artistic or graphic design background, you could do this pretty for free, or, whatever the subscription fee is for the software. And she would do all that. And I was like, oh wow. And like, yeah, she wasn't becoming a millionaire or anything, none like Marie Sondak or something kind of, level, but it was still like she was making a living doing that, like making good money doing that. And it was kind of like this moment for me, because at the time I was in my MFA, I was going, there's like a stigma around self-publishing when you go through the kind of traditional routes of things. And I'm fascinated by that too, where it's like, why does this stigma still exist when there's all this opportunity? So yeah, I was just curious, and our listeners are curious about that. Yeah, when you kind of take it into your own hands and do that.
Yeah.
And the question was, yeah, what was that like in terms of self-publishing? Taking that step, that leap, into it.
Yeah, it was definitely scary. I think me and my dad probably have a million emails going back and forth because he would help me with the research, figuring out what was the best. And, it's hard using Amazon, I think, because I didn't want to at first. I really wanted to do something more independent, small business, but financially and time-wise, it made the most sense. I mean, I sent pictures today to this gentleman, and if he uploads them today, I'll look at them tomorrow, and maybe by Tuesday the book will be uploaded. And if I order it Tuesday,
Right.
I'll have it by Thursday. I mean, that's insane to me. I mean, the art itself takes a while with my artist and editing, but I mean, once it's ready to go, in under a week, I can get it published and online and live. And I think that that's just amazing. I mean, we have my book, First Day an Adoption Story, up in less than a week ago now, and we specifically did it because National Adoption Day is the 23rd of this month, and I couldn't have done that with a conventional publisher. This might have not even been available for Adoption Day 2025. And
Right.
so I think that there's an idea that I'm in a rush, or that people are in a rush when they're self-publishing, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's that when they're passionate and they're artistic and they're doing something like this, they have a lot of ideas. And so I don't see the point in waiting. I mean, when I'm able to get a book
Right.
out for $200, I think that that's, why not do it? Why not put all of them out, put all the ideas out and, continue the ball, continue rolling, continue generating new ideas. And I think it's so much fun, honestly. I love doing it and I love looking at it and I love sharing it with people. And the easiest, fastest, funnest way to do it is right now through Amazon KDP.
Right. Yeah, and I've been doing that. My plan is by next year trying to because I'm in that boat, right? And I don't do children's
Hmm.
literature so much, although I've thought about it now that I have a daughter, and she's not quite she's almost 8 weeks old,
Oh
so
my
she's not
gosh, so
quite
you're
at that,
fresh.
Yeah, yeah, she's not quite at that. We're reading books every night and stuff, but we will be there. But so I'm like thinking, oh, maybe I'll try some of the children's books too. But said I'm just tired of waiting, right? I'm tired of being like waiting months, years to have somebody say no,
Yeah.
right? Like it's just kind of. I have these things. I'm like, why don't I just put out like 3 or 4 next
Hmm.
year or something? Just try it out. And so that's why I'm fascinated by this, and I want to ask writers, and especially successful when you have success stories like
Hmm.
this. Like they're more common than I think people. If you put in the work,
Yeah.
right? If you do the contracts, if you take the time, if you're marketing it through social media and other things, spending a little bit of money to get it right, do it the right way, it works, and it is kind of
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think I do see the value in having an agent and having a larger publisher, and I am actively looking at those venues. And
right,
initially, one of the ideas and one of the advices that was given, one the advice that was given to me was to basically come up with all these books, get them edited, wait on the art, wait on the publishing, and then just have them, and then maybe someone will buy them. And I was
right,
impatient, and I said, absolutely not. I don't want to do that. First off, if I was to hire someone, I want to see their background. I want to see their work. I want to see everything. And
right,
second, what if it doesn't happen? What if it takes 4 or 5 years? Why would I wait and hold myself back when there's so many more opportunities? And I just felt like I didn't want to put all of my eggs in that basket. So I might be
right,
limiting the amount of agents that would want me due to that I'm publishing actively, self-published. But at the end of the day, do I really want an agent that doesn't fall under those, values that I have, that I want to make sure I'm getting work out? My children are young and I want them to enjoy these books just like the rest of the
right,
children. So I don't want to write children's books that I'm putting out when my kids are 10 and 12. I want to enjoy them and I want to have fun with them. I want to read them. My kids love them. In A Boat in the Kitchen, there's a dinosaur in the pantry, and my son thinks that's the coolest thing ever. And we regularly
right.
talk about it. And I wouldn't have that if I didn't self-publish. And so, I can maybe be called selfish for that, but I want to enjoy the fruits of my labor with my kids because this is the time. And so doing that
Yeah,
it's really rewarding. And just like in theater with memorizing a script, it's just you feel really accomplished putting that work out and doing it yourself, even if
yeah,
you only get a few sales at first. Um, but doing it yourself, you're motivated to work, into the wee hours of the morning. I'm sure you're editing and doing everything,
right.
while your daughter's sleeping. You find the hours that work and then you do it. And when you enjoy it, it doesn't really feel like work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's changing. Like Amazon has completely disrupted the old business model. And you're starting to see, like you said, you're looking for agents. I bet there's a few that are coming to you at this point, with the social media following, you can prove that you have sales. You can prove that you have a fan base now because you did it yourself.
Hmm.
And they're like, oh, how many followers do you have? But it's like, well, if you have sales, you don't even need followers. If you're just up there doing like the kind of traditional marketing through Amazon or something, and yes, listeners, that costs a little bit of money, but not as much as you would think. And it's like, once you can prove that actually I'm selling this many copies, how many are your clients selling?
Hmm.
Like how many are you bringing something to the table? Because now you have the power,
Yeah.
you have the upper hand now in that negotiation process.
Yeah,
Where it's like, why should I give you 10% of this? What are
exactly.
you going to bring to
Oh
it?
yeah.
Are you going to, get me featured on all of the Scholastic
Yeah.
Book Fair stuff or whatever? Like, because that's something that's okay, maybe you deserve 10% then. But if you're not going to do that, I don't need you. It does empower the writer more. And I think that the whole industry is, well, not everybody, but I think there are people that are coming around to it. At least the smart ones are starting to come around to be like, the old way is completely out the window for the most part. They're losing money on books. They're not. They're spending, 100,000 or whatever it costs for
Mm.
paper to print, but then you have this print on demand service with Amazon, it doesn't cost anything up front. You only cost when it sells, whether they print out a copy and stuff. It's really changing the game. And I've seen even some publishers, like the big books, like I like the James Bond books and stuff. Most of those now, when you buy them online, they're print on demand through the publisher. They're not printing a bunch of copies beforehand and waiting for people to come pick them up. They're printing them one at a time as people order, and it really saves a lot of money, a lot of overhead too. So it's actually a better business model than the traditional route. So yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. That's fantastic.
And I think something that I didn't know until using KDP is that because I'm still the owner and I'm still the copyright holder of my book, just because I'm selling on Amazon does not mean I can't sell elsewhere. So I have, you also have the ability to order author copies for about half the amount that you sell them for on Amazon. So I'm able to order, as many author copies, I think up to 100 at a time of any book that I publish. And I'm able to sell them individually. I'm able to go to bookstores. There's a small bookstore in downtown Fredericksburg called Jabberwocky, and they hold all three out of my 4 children's books, I think, right now, and we're getting the other one in soon. And I just take them physically to her, and it's a lot of on the ground work, but I love it. And I love that my friends go to that bookstore and they see my book. And I've gone to my local libraries and they hold all of my books. And I've called them before to be like, hey, do you guys need any more? And they ended up just ordering through Amazon once I gave them the one, and they added it to their collection. So I think it's not an end all be all. You can do KDP, you can do Amazon self-publishing or any self-publishing, and then you can have your own and you can sell them on your own and see other avenues. You can still send them out to agents if that's what you choose to do. You can send them to bookstores. You still have ownership, which I think is a really powerful force, and it's not just a one size fits all.
Absolutely. I know John Grisham, his first book, I think, was The Firm, right? And he said that's what he did. He basically printed up copies, and it cost much more back then, listeners, way more in the 90s to do this. And he drove to libraries. I think he said he drove to like 200 libraries within, whatever couple 100-mile radius of his house. And he was literally just giving them copies. And then eventually it found its way to like Hollywood or something. And somebody had like a self-published book from him, and they made that movie, with Tom Cruise, The Firm, like out of his first book. And he said that happened, like he had the movie rights sold before he ever got like an agent and a deal with a publisher, because he was just hustling doing that himself. And again, that was much more difficult in the 90s than it is now. But yeah, that's fantastic. And one question we like to ask going off all this, and we don't need any numbers or anything like that, please don't feel obligated. How do you make a living? Do you make any money off the books? Because it's tough out there for writers. So since we have mostly writers listening, they like to know, are you able to make a profit off of this at all? Is it just a labor of love? How do you do that? How do you make a living as a writer? Or do you?
I think the first half of the year was very much a labor of love. And I think as I've gotten more books out, it has turned profit. And I think that that's been extremely rewarding. I definitely think that I haven't made as much money on Amazon. It's been a lot of the hustle and bustle, going to the smaller bookstores, having them commit to like, 10 or 20 books at a time. That's where I've really seen more of the profit. But I don't think as of now I'm really making a living. Like my husband's income is definitely the one that we rely on for like the mortgage. But I'm in the first year, and so I have really high hopes that this is going in the right direction, and that it's something that can sustain. Right now it can pay for a karate class or, extra gas or, a nice, expensive cup of coffee. But I think it's balancing. I think when you want to do something yourself, I think there's risks when you're doing it, but there's also reward. You just kind of have to be patient, and you also have to be willing to work really hard to do it. And so I'm doing all of those things, and I'm enjoying every second of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's one of the reasons we asked that question is, one, to dissolve the illusion that all these writers are millionaires, right? Like even if you have your book in a bookstore, you have some big award, you're probably not making a living. You need a day job. You need something, or you need a spouse. You need something that you're living off of, because even when you have, a National Book Award, it doesn't necessarily mean you're making a living. Those guys, the people that get those awards, are probably have a day job as a teacher somewhere, in a college level or something. That's how they make a living. So it is kind of fascinating how, there's just that illusion that people have that you're like, oh, well, she's getting all this money for her books. It's like, well, no, she's
Hmm.
hustling. And how does social media play into that? Does social media help with sales at
It
all,
does
or
a little bit. I
how
think it
does?
helps reach parents and reach families a lot. And I've had a lot of one-on-ones. So something that I recently did is I went on social media and I searched adoption, and I found all of these
Okay.
families whose main platform is adoption. And then I message their Instagrams myself and I say, I'm an adoptee. I wrote a book
Yes.
about adoption. I would love to send you one. Here's the link, and I've had people write me back saying, oh, thank you, just ordered. And I think that that's like a catch 22 for me because I priced my book low where I don't make a huge amount on it, but I priced it in a way that people are okay paying for it. So it's not
Right.
a $12 to $15 book where people might be like, oh, I'm going to put it in my cart and then think about it. I feel like, at least for
Right.
me, if something's under $10, it's an easier click to buy it now. And so I wanted to do that for them so that when I had instances like that, because that, profit, if they post it on their social medias where they have all of these prospective parents or these adoptees or adoptive families, working with them, then they'll have a huge, bigger platform for that. So I think using that to our benefit and to really connecting with those people and their stories will outweigh, the fact that I'm making less money per book
Right.
because it'll reach more people.
Yeah. I love that too. The kind of just reaching
Hmm.
out in DMs, kind of, yeah. That's we've had a couple writers on that. Even if they have book
Hmm.
deals with a major press, that's what they have to do. It is DIY,
Yeah.
and you have to go do that anyway. Send DMs, guess people's emails, and just kind of offer it up. We had a guy who wrote a memoir, a debut memoir, and he said, he got on a major press, but he was just saying, most of the time he's just sending DMs to podcasts. He's doesn't have a publicist. He's guessing emails and he's getting on these shows, and that's moving the needle, at least for like Amazon
Hmm.
rankings and things, more so than you would think. And it is kind of,
No,
yeah,
I love that.
it's yeah, it's fantastic. Another question we like to ask all the writers that come on here: what is your writing routine like? What do you
Uh,
like to do for that?
Writing routine. So you might understand it as a new parent. It's late at night.
Yes.
It's late at night and it's in the dark and it's on my phone. I have notes on my phone and I will start writing ideas. So for Dust Bunnies, for instance, I was in my bed trying to think of ideas. It was right after Boat in the Kitchen had come out, and I had writer's block. And I thought, I'm never writing another good book. I'm never going to have an idea I like again. It's never going to come to me. And I started thinking about how my house was messy. And then I started thinking about dust bunnies, and I went on Pinterest and I Pinterest searched dust bunnies, and they were these really scary characters that had big fangs. And I thought, well, I can't show my son that. And then I was like, well, why don't I try drawing one out? And I tried doodling a dust bunny, and I started writing dust bunnies from right there. And I came up with a really raw script that night. And I ran into the bedroom and I told my husband, and I said, what do you think of this? And I was reading it to him, and he goes, sounds great. And I was like, awesome. And I was able to go to sleep. And I woke up the next morning and the ball had started. And I was like, this is going to be a good one. This is going to be a fun one. And I started talking to my kids about dust bunnies. And I had these ideas of it needs to have a button, and it needs to have a shoelace as a bow, and it needs to be this kind of quirky, funny little character because they seem like that. You vacuum, you sweep, you dust, you mop, and then 2 seconds later you look over and there's a ball of dog hair in the corner of your kitchen, and you're like, I literally just cleaned. So you're like, they must be hiding, they must be doing something.
Yeah.
So let's give them these little personalities. And that's really how it started. And it was just really fun to write it. And there was just a lot of enjoyment.
Yeah, absolutely. I do. You said this, I guess. Yeah, kind of storyboarding. You doodle
Hmm.
out and stuff like that helps with the creativity and the ideas.
Definitely.
Kind of.
We have an image in there that reminds me of Home Alone, where he has this huge map of his house, and he has mapped out how he's going to get to these burglars and how he's going to plan of attack for protecting his house. And I had this idea that the dust bunnies have a similar map of how they're going to stay away from the vacuum, where their safe zones are. And it's always in the children's room under their bed that's never clean. And so they have all these things. So we have all these dust bunnies, and they have a Q-tip, and they're ready for war to go against the broom. And I always really loved that from Home Alone. So I took that and put that into dust bunnies as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and going off of that, there's a question that we like to ask. Well, I'll get to it here in a minute, but we like to ask What advice would you give to writers out there just starting out, or maybe trying to build something on their own? What advice would you offer to them?
Don't second guess yourself. I think when you have an initial idea and a gut feeling that something's going to be good, I think it will. And I think that even when things aren't selling or things aren't doing well, I think I really have, I'm really excited about the books that I've written. And I think that that came with really knowing my gut. And I went through artists and I really know visually what I wanted it to look like and the style and the enjoyment. And it's something that I really loved. And I had someone tell me one time, which has nothing to do with books, but they said, if you fill your home with things you love, the style will kind of make itself. If you love that pillow, if you love that chair, if you love that bed set, at some point it will all make sense in your house. You don't have to buy the same bedroom furniture that all matches. And so that's really how I look at books and writing is if I find the artist that I love, if I write about what I love, if I publish it the way I love it, at some point it's going to fall into place and it'll end up as something that I really love. And it doesn't all have to fit perfectly. It doesn't all have to look the right way or that the way I think it should look. At first I was like, well, I love the book As Quick as a Cricket. So I need to do watercolor. Everything needs to be watercolor. It needs to be hand done. It needs to be perfect, needs to be realistic. And, I moved away from that because I was like, well, I don't really love the way that looks, but I really love Lola's style and this very eclectic color. And, it kind of looks like almost like a collage is put together. And I was like, that's gorgeous. I love that. And maybe it's not exactly what I would think of with the idea that I have, but I think that looks really cool. And I want to somehow add that in. And I think it all kind of fell together. So I think finding those collage pieces to make it work, I think was just really fun. And I was able to do that. And so that would be the advice is just find what you love. And it doesn't matter if you think it's going to work. If you love it, just go with it, run with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah. And going off of that, one thing we like to ask is because like you said, if you're filling yourself, you're filling up your head, you're filling up your ideas with things around you. We like to ask writers that come on, what are you reading now? What are you watching now? What are you listening to? Anything good that you would do is filling your head and giving you ideas right now?
My husband's going to kill me. I rewatch Seinfeld religiously. Seinfeld is my comfort show. It's my writing show. I listen to it every night. I watch it while I go to sleep. And I think it really goes to the love portion where there's, I've looked into the making of the show. And one of the funniest parts is that one, it's about nothing. And two, that one of the big things that on set they talked about was that the character's going to have absolutely no growth. But I think to me that stagnancy is really comforting. So while everything else is moving and chaotic, I think having that stagnancy is really nice because I always know what's going to happen. So listening to the episodes, I know what Elaine is going to say, I know what Jerry's going to say. And so I rewatch that for comfort regularly and I absolutely love it. And it's just such a comfort show. And it's really like a background noise for me. And they have all of these quirky things and they have things that adults pin on that my children don't. And I think that that's great. And it's a show about nothing. And sometimes that can be the funniest thing in the world. So even when I'm writing and I'm thinking that my idea is dumb or I'm second guessing, it's like, it's okay. There was a show about nothing.
Yeah,
it's all right. We'll figure it out.
It's very millennial
It is.
too. Yeah, like our Seinfeld specifically, and it was off the air by this time. But like when I was in middle school and high school, I remember coming home, and the syndicated reruns would be on TV like 4:00 or whatever. When I'd come home from school, and I'd watch it with my brother, for an hour or whatever. That like 2 episodes back to back, and it was very important, kind of very comforting, very looked forward to it every day with that. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Before sports practice or something.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And they have the Bookman episode with the library books and the important library books. And it's just, you cling on to these little phrases, and it's comforting. And, there's always new shows and new things that pop up. I love, shark movies for some reason I've really clung on to. Like The Meg was phenomenal. Jason Statham is, one of my favorite actors to look at on TV. But for some reason I hang on to those, and my husband's not super into them, but I absolutely love them. He loves crime shows.
Yeah.
And, I don't know why, but a good murder mystery is always something nice to fall asleep to as well.
Yeah. There's something comforting about the formula, I think, with that too, like the kind of police procedurals or like SVU or something like that. Yeah, it's very comforting. And the final question we like to ask writers now, and you sort of answered this. What are you working on now? What's taking up your time, Sasha?
Yeah, so All Out of Ducks. All Out of Ducks is taking up my time, and the divorce book. But All Out of Ducks has been a big one over the past few weeks, really perfecting it. It took a lot of different turns. Originally, it did have the F-bomb throughout it. And I have a girlfriend who I love dearly, and she said it's great, but I'm never reading it to my son because he's gonna say every word. And so I said, okay, well, you're gonna be like a lot of moms out there, including myself. So I need to figure out a way to make this okay. And so we ended up doing it, and I added in all these animals, and we have this line in there that's talks about where the flamingo is that one bear, and an inside-out shirt, shoes on the wrong feet, please just walk out the door, fish don't run in the street. And it's, the parents will understand that language pretty easily, I assume, but children won't. And you'll see in the illustration are some fish running across the street while there's a kid tugging mom to get out the door. There's a flamingo holding its teddy bear. It's just very whimsical and fun. But it's kind of like those Disney movies you were talking about, where there's sometimes these really funny, quirky moments, like in, for instance, the Penguins of Madagascar had a lot of like random people's names and actors inside the movie that children couldn't pin on, but adults definitely understood that. And so I really wanted to bring that into it with the parenting aspect. And it's really a funny, quirky book. And the underlying message is that parenting is exhausting. Some days we're all out of ducks and we're just trying to make it through, and that you're not alone. And our big movement that we did for that book is that I have the National Maternal Hotline phone number on the cover of the book, as well as on the inside and the back, to make sure that parents know that there are resources, there is help, and that you're not alone. And that I myself, the writer, suffered from severe postpartum depression after my second child, and that's okay. And it's not faux pas, and it's not bad to talk about, and it doesn't make me a bad mom or a bad wife. And it just happens. Pregnancy is hard. Parenting is hard. Adoption is hard. And that's okay. And you can come out of it, and you can enjoy your children and your family. And some days are just harder than others. And some days we're all out of ducks. And this book talks a lot about that, but it gives us an ability to maybe read it to our children and have even a little bit more of humor, because we're able to tell them we're all out of ducks.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Sasha, thank you so much. Where can people find your stuff?
They can find them on my website at sashasaidman.com. And they can also find me on social media. Both Facebook and Instagram is just under Sasha Saidman. And TikTok is Sasha Saidman under the Kowalskis.
Fantastic. Go check it out. And that's all linked below as well, listeners. This has been another episode of Heavy Board.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.